He was shaking. His voice was barely louder than a breath. "They took my sister." The little boy didn't cry, he didn't scream, he whispered, "Because sometimes pain is so heavy it steals your voice." And in front of him stood a group of bikers, men the world often judges by leather jackets, roaring engines, and tattoos. But they didn't ask questions, they didn't hesitate, they didn't wait a second. Because heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they ride motorcycles. We are taught, often without realizing it, to judge people before we know them. From a young age, society hands us invisible labels and quietly tells us who is good, who is dangerous, who is trustworthy, and who should be avoided. These judgments are rarely based on facts. They are based on appearance. Clothes, hairstyles, accents, professions, vehicles people drive, or the groups they belong to become short. Cuts our minds used to decide who someone is, long before they ever speak a word. Bikers are one of the most misunderstood groups in society. Leather jackets, heavy boots, loud engines, tattoos, and rough looks often create an image that is associated with aggression, rebellion, or trouble. Movies, news headlines, and stereotypes have painted them as people to fear rather than people to understand. Many parents would instinctively pull their children closer if they saw a group of bikers approaching. Many would cross the street, lock their doors, or look away. That reaction does not come from experience, it comes from judgment. Now imagine the position of the little boy in this story, a child already overwhelmed by fear and loss. His sister has been taken. His world has collapsed in a matter of moments. In that fragile state, he approaches people that society has told him are dangerous. This alone challenges everything we believe about appearance. The boy did not see leather jackets or motorcycles. He did not see tattoos or tough expressions. He saw people who might help him when no one else would. Judging by appearance creates invisible walls between human beings. It stops us from seeing hearts, intentions, and character. When we judge too quickly, we deny others the chance to show who they truly are. And we deny ourselves the chance to experience unexpected goodness. If the bikers had been judged only by how they looked, this story would never have existed. The boy might have walked away, silenced by fear not only of his loss but of society's warnings. Appearance is a poor measure of character because it is easy to fake and impossible to fully understand. A person wearing a uniform may still lack compassion. Someone dressed respectfully may still turn away from suffering. On the other hand, a person who looks intimidating may carry a deep sense of justice, loyalty, and kindness. True character reveals itself through action, not looks. The bikers proved this when they didn't hesitate, didn't mock the child, and didn't ignore him. Their actions spoke louder than any stereotype ever could. This key point forces us to reflect on our own behavior. How many times have we made assumptions about someone before knowing their story? How many times have we decided who someone is based on how they look, where they come from, or how they live? These judgments influence who we trust, who we help, and sometimes who we abandon. In critical moments, such judgments can become dangerous. Judging by appearance is also a form of comfort for the human mind. It simplifies a complex world. It allows us to categorize people quickly, so we feel safe and in control. But that comfort comes at a cost. It costs empathy. It costs fairness. It costs opportunities for connection. When we rely on appearance, we stop asking important questions. We stop listening. We stop seeing individuals as individuals. The bikers in this story shattered the image placed upon them. They did not argue against stereotypes with words. They destroyed them with action. They showed that compassion does not belong to a single class, profession, or lifestyle. It belongs to those who choose it. Their response reminds us that goodness is not limited to respectable appearances. Sometimes it comes wrapped in forms we were taught to fear. This lesson is especially important in a world growing more divided every day. We are separated by social class, culture, religion, language, and lifestyle. Judging by appearance strengthens those divisions. It tells us that they are different from us, But when we look beyond appearances, we discover shared humanity, fear, love, pain, loyalty, and hope. The little boy did not need people who looked kind. He needed people who were kind. That distinction matters. Kindness is not visible on the surface. Courage is not written on clothing. Integrity is not defined by style. These qualities reveal themselves only when someone is tested. By challenging our habit of judging by appearance, we open ourselves to seeing real heroes among us. We begin to understand that anyone, regardless of how they look, may be capable of extraordinary compassion. And once we learn that, we also learn to look at ourselves differently, realizing that who we appear to be is far less important than what we choose to do when someone needs us. We often imagine pain as something loud. We expect it to cry, to scream, to demand attention. We associate suffering with tears, chaos, and visible breakdowns. But real pain does not always announce itself in dramatic ways. Sometimes pain is quiet. Sometimes it is hidden behind trembling hands, lowered eyes, or a voice that can barely form a sentence. And sometimes pain is reduced to a whisper. The little boy in this story did not run toward the bikers shouting for help. He did not collapse in tears or create a scene. He whispered, "They took my sister." That whisper carries more weight than any scream ever could. It tells us that the boy was already exhausted by fear. His emotions were not overflowing. They were buried deep inside him, pressing down so heavily that even his voice struggled to rise. Silent pain is often the most dangerous kind because it is easy to miss. The world is noisy. Everyone is busy. People are rushing, scrolling, talking, arguing. In such a world, only the loudest voices are noticed. Those who suffer quietly are often overlooked, ignored, or misunderstood. A whisper can disappear in the noise unless someone is willing to stop and truly listen. Children, in particular, often express pain silently. They may not have the words to explain what they are feeling. They may be afraid they won't be believed. They may feel shame, confusion, or fear of consequences. This little boy had lost his sense of safety. His sister, someone familiar and loved, was suddenly gone. That kind of trauma can paralyze a child. Silence becomes a defense, not because the pain is small, but because it is overwhelming. Silent pain is not limited to children. Adults carry it every day. People walk among us carrying grief, fear, regret, abuse, loneliness, and trauma without ever speaking about it. They go to work, attend classes, smile in public, and fulfill responsibilities while their inner world is falling apart. Society often rewards this silence, calling it strength or resilience, without realizing that unacknowledged pain does not disappear, it grows heavier. The boy's whisper reminds us that listening is not just about hearing words. It is about recognizing distress even when it is barely expressed. The bikers could have ignored him. They could have dismissed the quiet voice as insignificant. Many people do. Quiet pain does not demand attention, so it is often treated as less urgent. But pain does not measure its importance by volume. There is also fear attached to speaking softly. A whisper suggests uncertainty about whether help will come, whether anyone will care, whether speaking up is even safe. That whisper was a risk. The boy took a chance that these strangers would not turn away. Silent pain often exists because the person suffering has already learned that the world does not always respond with kindness. When someone whispers their pain, they are not being weak. They are being brave in a different way. It takes courage to speak at all when fear is choking your voice. It takes courage to trust anyone when your world has already proven unsafe. The whisper is not a lack of strength. It is evidence of it. This key point challenges us to change how we respond to others. We are trained to react to emergencies, to raised voices, to visible crises. But what about the quiet ones? What about the people who don't know how to ask for help loudly? What about those who hint, pause, hesitate, or speak indirectly? Recognizing silent pain requires empathy, patience, and awareness. It requires us to slow down. The biker's response shows the power of listening beyond sound. They recognized the seriousness of the situation not because the boy was loud, but because his fear was real. They understood that a whisper like that does not come from nowhere. It comes from desperation. It comes from a place where hope is fragile. Ignoring silent pain can have serious consequences. Many tragedies happen not because no one cared, but because no one noticed. Signs were subtle. Voices were quiet. Signals were misunderstood. When we learn to listen only to noise, we fail those who suffer in silence. This point also forces us to reflect inward. How often do we hide our own pain? How often do we whisper our struggles instead of speaking clearly because we fear judgment, rejection, or burdening others? Silent pain is not just something we observe in others. It is something many of us live with every day. Understanding that pain can be silent teaches us responsibility. It reminds us that compassion is not reactive, it is attentive. It does not wait for screams. It listens for whispers. Courage is often misunderstood. We imagine it as something dramatic, bold speeches, heroic poses, or fearless individuals charging into danger without hesitation. Movies and stories have taught us that courage looks loud, confident, and carefully planned. But real courage, the kind that changes lives, is often much simpler and far more urgent. True courage is not about how brave someone appears. It is about how quickly they choose to act when the moment demands it. When the little boy whispered, "They took my sister," there was no time for long discussions or careful calculations. This was not a situation that allowed comfort or delay. Every second mattered. And in that moment, the bikers did not pause to debate whether it was safe, whether it was their responsibility, or whether someone else should handle it. They acted. That instant decision is the essence of true courage. Immediate action requires something many people struggle with: the willingness to step into uncertainty. Most hesitation comes from fear. Fear of getting involved, fear of making a mistake, fear of consequences, fear of responsibility. People often tell themselves, "Let someone else handle it," or "It's not my problem," or "I don't have enough information." These thoughts feel reasonable, but they allow harm to continue. The bikers chose a different path. They did not wait for absolute certainty. They did not demand proof or guarantees. They recognized urgency, and urgency demanded movement. Courage, in its truest form, is not the absence of fear. It is the decision that something else matters more than fear. In this case, a child's safety mattered more than personal comfort or risk. Immediate action also reveals priorities. What we do in the first few seconds of a crisis shows what we truly value. When someone is in danger, delay becomes a choice. Waiting is not neutral, it favors the problem. By acting quickly, the bikers showed that protecting the vulnerable was a priority strong enough to override hesitation. This kind of courage does not come from authority or obligation. The bikers were not police officers responding to a call. They were not legally required to intervene. Their action was voluntary, and that is what makes it powerful. Voluntary courage is rooted in moral conviction rather than duty. It comes from an internal sense of right and wrong. True courage is also quiet. There was no announcement, no preparation, no dramatic build-up. The bikers did not say, "We are brave," or "Watch what we are about to do." They simply moved. Courage does not need witnesses to exist. It does not wait for praise or recognition. It responds to need. Many people believe they would act bravely in a crisis, but hesitation often reveals otherwise. We underestimate how powerful fear can be when it arrives unexpectedly. Immediate action requires mental readiness, the habit of choosing responsibility over comfort. It is a mindset developed through values, empathy, and awareness, not through chance. This key point challenges us to examine our own responses to urgency. How often do we delay when action is needed? How often do we wait for perfect conditions, more information, or someone else's approval? In moments of crisis, waiting can be costly. Opportunities to help are often brief, and once they pass, they cannot be recovered. Immediate action does not mean reckless behavior. It means recognizing when delay is more dangerous than movement. It means understanding that doing something, however imperfect, can be better than doing nothing. The bikers did not act blindly, they acted decisively. Their response teaches us that courage is measured in moments, not intentions. It is easy to say we care. It is harder to prove it under pressure. The moment the boy spoke, a line was drawn between those who might have sympathized and those who chose to respond. True courage is not about waiting until you feel ready. It is about acting because the situation cannot wait. Fear is one of the strongest forces that controls human behavior. It tells us to stay back, to protect ourselves, to avoid involvement, and to choose safety over responsibility. Fear is not always irrational. It exists to keep us alive. But when fear becomes the primary decision maker, it can strip away our humanity. It can turn us into observers instead of helpers, witnesses instead of protectors. In a situation like this, fear would have been the easiest response. Fear of danger, fear of getting involved in something complicated, fear of consequences, blame, or failure. The little boy's words carried risk along with urgency. Helping him meant stepping into the unknown, possibly into conflict, danger, or responsibility far greater than anyone had planned for that day. Many people would have chosen fear. They might have felt sympathy but remained still. They might have offered comforting words without action. They might have told the child to find authorities or someone else. These responses often feel reasonable because fear justifies them. Fear convinces us that distance is wisdom. The bikers made a different choice. They chose humanity over fear. Humanity is what reminds us that another person's suffering matters, even when it disrupts our comfort. Humanity is what connects us to strangers and makes their pain feel personal. When the bikers listened to the boy, they did not see a problem to avoid. They saw a human being in distress. Choosing humanity over fear requires empathy. Empathy asks a dangerous question. What if this were someone I loved? Once that question is asked, fear loses some of its power. The bikers likely understood that a child without help is a child without protection. In that moment, fear may have existed, but it did not lead. Fear isolates. Humanity connects. Fear encourages distance. Humanity demands closeness. By stepping forward instead of stepping back, the bikers rejected the instinct to protect only themselves. They accepted shared responsibility for another person's pain. This key point highlights a truth we often avoid. Fear is comfortable. It gives us excuses. It allows us to believe we are being sensible rather than selfish. Humanity, on the other hand, requires effort. It requires emotional involvement. It requires risk, and because of that, many people avoid it. Humanity over fear also means seeing beyond worst-case scenarios. Fear imagines everything that could go wrong. Humanity focuses on what will happen if no one helps. The bikers understood that inaction had consequences too. Doing nothing would not have been neutral. It would have left a child alone in a moment of terror. This lesson is especially relevant in a world where people are increasingly disconnected. We are taught to mind our own business, to avoid trouble, to prioritize personal safety at all costs. While safety is important, a society driven entirely by fear becomes cold and fragmented. It becomes a place where suffering is observed but not addressed. The biker's choice reminds us that humanity is not abstract. It is practical. It shows up in decisions, in movement, in willingness to be involved. Humanity means refusing to let fear decide everything. This point also challenges us to recognize how often fear disguises itself as logic. We tell ourselves we are being realistic, careful, or responsible, when in truth we are afraid. Recognizing this distinction is difficult but necessary. Humanity begins where fear ends. By choosing humanity over fear, the bikers demonstrated that courage and compassion are deeply connected. Fear may never fully disappear, but it does not have to control us. When we allow humanity to lead, we act not because it is safe, but because it is right. Responsibility is often misunderstood as something assigned by position, authority, or obligation. We tend to believe that only certain people are responsible in moments of crisis: police officers, teachers, parents, leaders, or professionals trained to respond. This belief allows the rest of society to step back, assuming that responsibility belongs to someone else. But this story challenges that idea. It shows that responsibility is not always given, sometimes it is chosen. When the little boy spoke, the bikers were not required to act. They had no official duty, no legal command, no guarantee of support. They could have easily decided that the situation was beyond them. Many people would have said, "This is not our problem," and walked away without guilt, supported by the common belief that responsibility belongs elsewhere. But responsibility does not begin with authority. It begins with awareness. The moment the bikers became aware of the child's pain, a choice appeared. Awareness creates opportunity, and opportunity creates responsibility. Once we see suffering clearly, we must decide what kind of person we will be in response to it. Choosing responsibility means accepting involvement. It means acknowledging that walking away is still a decision, not an absence of one. Too often, people believe that doing nothing is neutral. In reality, inaction often supports harm by allowing it to continue. When we choose not to act, we silently accept the outcome. Responsibility is uncomfortable because it demands effort, risk, and accountability. Accepting responsibility means accepting the possibility of failure. It means accepting that things may not go as planned. Many people avoid responsibility not because they lack compassion, but because they fear the weight that comes with it. The bikers accepted that weight. They did not know how the situation would unfold, but they understood that refusing responsibility would leave a child alone. That understanding mattered more than uncertainty. Responsibility, in this sense, was not about control. It was about care. This key point forces us to confront a difficult truth. Society's biggest failures often occur not because people are cruel, but because they refuse responsibility. Everyone assumes someone else will act. Everyone waits, and while they wait, damage is done. Responsibility disappears into the space between people. Choosing responsibility also means resisting excuses. It is easy to say we are not trained, not qualified, not powerful enough. But responsibility does not require perfection. It requires willingness. The bikers did not need to have all the answers. They needed to respond. Responsibility is deeply connected to values. What we choose to take responsibility for reveals what we believe matters. When we choose comfort over involvement, we reveal that ease matters more than impact. When we choose responsibility, we reveal that human life and dignity matter more than convenience. This point also invites self-reflection. How often do we witness problems and convince ourselves they are not ours to solve? How often do we avoid responsibility by hiding behind rules, roles, or excuses? These moments define our character more than we realize. The biker's decision shows that responsibility is not about being forced. It is about being faithful to one's conscience. It is about recognizing that sometimes being present is enough to make a difference. Responsibility begins when someone decides, if not me, then who? The word hero often brings a very specific image to mind. We picture someone extraordinary, strong, famous, highly trained, or officially recognized. Society teaches us that heroes wear uniforms, hold titles, or possess special powers. Because of this belief, many ordinary people remove themselves from the possibility of heroism. They assume heroism belongs to someone else, someone more qualified, more prepared, or more important. This story quietly destroys that belief. The bikers were not labeled as heroes by society. They were not celebrated figures, nor were they expected to step in. In fact, many people would have expected the opposite. Yet, in the most critical moment, they became exactly what the situation required. not because they were special, but because they were willing. Heroism is not a permanent identity, it is a momentary decision. It appears when someone chooses action over comfort, compassion over fear, and responsibility over indifference. The bikers did not wake up that day planning to be heroes. They became heroes the moment they refused to ignore a whispered cry for help. This key point reminds us that heroism is accessible. It does not require perfection, strength, or public recognition. It requires presence. It requires paying attention to the needs around us. Many heroic acts go unnoticed because they happen quietly, without witnesses or rewards. Yet their impact is often life-changing. One of the most dangerous myths about heroism is that it requires extraordinary ability. This myth discourages people from acting because they believe they are not capable enough. But heroism is rarely about ability, it is about intention. Doing what you can with what you have in the moment you are in is often enough. The bikers did not need to be flawless. They needed to care. Their willingness turned them into protectors, not because they were perfect, but because they were present. This challenges the idea that heroism is rare. In reality, opportunities for heroism exist everywhere. Most are simply ignored. This point also teaches us that heroes do not always look heroic. Sometimes they look ordinary, sometimes they look misunderstood, sometimes they look like people we were taught to fear or judge. Heroism does not follow stereotypes, it breaks them. Recognizing that anyone can be a hero also places responsibility back into our hands. If heroism were limited to a few, most of us could excuse ourselves from action. But if anyone can be a hero, then everyone has the potential and the choice. That realization is uncomfortable because it removes excuses. Heroism does not always mean saving a life in a dramatic way. Sometimes it means listening. Sometimes it means standing beside someone who is afraid. Sometimes it means refusing to look away. These actions may seem small, but in the right moment they become powerful. The biker's story invites us to redefine heroism. It is not about recognition, applause, or storytelling. It is about impact. It is about how one decision can change the direction of someone else's life. When we understand that anyone can be a hero, we begin to see the world differently. We stop waiting for someone else to step forward. We realize that the next moment of heroism might belong to us, not because we are extraordinary, but because we are human. And so, this story leaves us with more than admiration. It leaves us with a responsibility. A little boy whispered because his world was breaking. A group of bikers listened because their humanity was awake. This moment reminds us that the world does not change because of loud promises or powerful titles. It changes because ordinary people choose to care when it would be easier not to. It changes when someone listens to a whisper instead of waiting for a scream. It changes when fear is set aside and compassion takes the lead. One day, each of us will stand at a similar crossroads. Someone will need help. Someone will be afraid. Someone will be quietly hoping that the person in front of them will not walk away. When that moment comes, remember this story. Remember that heroes are not defined by how they look, but by how they act. Remember that courage begins the instant we decide not to wait. And remember that sometimes, all it takes to change a life is the choice to listen and to step forward